Rated T for teen.
Hey everyone, it's the best in the world, CM Punk, back to shake up WWE 2K26. This year, the show never stops. You're running the greatest spectacle on earth with the biggest roster we've ever had. Over 400 superstars and legends from every era. Stack the tables, break the rules, burn it all down. And yeah, my very own showcase, telling my story the way it should have been told. Because when the show never stops, anything is possible. Available March 13th, pre-order now.
With Venmo Stash, a taco in one hand and ordering a ride in the other means you're stacking cash back. Nice. Get up to 5% cash back with Venmo Stash on your favorite brands when you pay with your Venmo debit card. From takeout to rideshares, entertainment and more, pick a bundle with your go-tos and start earning cash back at those brands. Earn more cash when you do more with Stash. Venmo Stash terms and exclusions apply. Max $100 cash back per month. See terms at venmo.me/stash terms.
In the 1980s, audiences knew true terror. A time when readers felt genuine horror. And just when you thought those days were dead and buried, we've gone and hit rewind. Knives, nightmares, and neon. Some things should never be rewound. New episodes fortnightly.
I'll do some scary movie.
You like scary movies?
Uh-huh.
What's your favorite scary movie?
I don't know.
You have to have a favorite.
Welcome to Twisted Soulmates, where the scares are always better together. Each episode will dissect the scariest scenes, unravel twisted plots, and discuss what makes these movies unforgettable.
I'm your host, Eddie.
And I'm Ashley.
And together we're here to explore the most terrifying films that have haunted us and audiences for decades.
Turn down the lights and grab your popcorn if you're ready to share our love for horror, with a few screams and laughs along the way.
Welcome to the Twisted Soulmates podcast.
Thanks for listening to the Red Treehouse, where I tell you scary stories to keep you up at night. You can listen to the Red Treehouse wherever you stream podcasts. Just be sure to follow, like, and subscribe. Oh, and leave a 5-star review. The Red Treehouse is dedicated to my dad. I love you, Pop. In this episode of the Red Treehouse, I'm going to narrate 2 terrific short horror stories. The Black Swan, written by L.G. Wells, and Mr. Belly's Infirmary, written by Sirius. A huge thank you to both for submitting these original stories. They're guaranteed to get under your skin and keep you up at night. So sit back, turn down the lights, pull up the covers, and pay close attention as I narrate The Black Swan by L.G. Wells and Mr. Belly's Infirmary by Sirius. I'm your host, Will. Welcome to the Red Treehouse.
TaxAct knows every small business owner has different tax filing needs. With TaxAct, you can file yourself with the help of an expert, or TaxAct can do it all for you. You're the boss, the head honcho, the top banana. And TaxAct is like your loyal, trusty tax aide, ready to pounce on any tax needs you might have. TaxAct is dying to pounce on some small business tax needs. TaxAct. Let's get them over with.
The Black Swan by L.G. Wells. Julian Thorne didn't believe in luck. He believed in design. Luck was for the people who played the lottery or waited for the bus. The desperate who hoped for the best because they lacked the power to demand it. Success was what happened when you forced the world to match your design. He stood in his penthouse kitchen, the aroma of $110 a bag espresso cutting through the clinical austerity of Calicata Borghini marble and low-iron Starfire glass. He reached into the pocket of his silk robe and produced a pair of dice. They were solid ivory, yellowed slightly by the oils of his skin, heavy and honest. Every morning for 15 years, Julian had rolled them. They were the only crack in his armor, the sole allowing of chance in a life otherwise paved in cold, hard certainty. A high total meant an aggressive day. Buy, fire, expand. A low total meant consolidation. Wait, watch, bleed them dry. The dice had never lied. They were as essential as his heartbeat, and twice as reliable. He tossed them. Click, clack. The first die settled quickly, a 6. The second die skittered toward the edge of the island, spinning like a top before it dropped flat. Julian leaned in, his brow furrowed. The die showed a 6, but there was something else. Right in the center of the 6 pips, where the white space should have been, sat a 7th mark. It was perfectly circular, blacker than the ink on a liquidation notice, and seemingly recessed into the ivory. He reached out to smudge it away, expecting lint or a drop of spilled espresso. His thumb moved over the surface, but the mark didn't move. He scraped it with a manicured nail, digging until the skin of his finger turned white. The mark remained. The roll, a perfect, impossible 13. Black Swan, he whispered. His voice sounded thin in the cavernous kitchen. He picked up the die. As he turned it in the light, the 7th mark seemed to stay fixed, as if it weren't painted on the ivory, but was a hole in the air itself, a puncture in the fabric of his vision. It pulsed with a sluggish, heavy rhythm, a fixed point in a world that had suddenly lost its axis. He didn't call a doctor. Doctors were for people who didn't understand how systems worked. Instead, he stood there for a long minute, watching the black mark occlude the gold leaf on his kitchen cabinetry, waiting for the glitch to reset. It didn't. The penthouse began to feel like a Hollywood set. The marble too white, the silence too thick. He retreated to his dressing room and pulled on a charcoal pinstriped suit that cost more than his security guard's annual salary. It was his armor, but as he cinched his silk tie, the 7th mark hovered directly over his reflected pupil in the mirror. It looked as though something small and stocky was peering out from the center of his brain. Julian forced a breath, tasting the expensive espresso and the metallic tang of a rising panic. He turned away from the glass, but the mark followed, a persistent smudge on the periphery of everything he saw. He grabbed his briefcase, heavy, textured, indisputably real, and headed for the door. The apartment was no longer a sanctuary. It had become a cage of white marble and impossible geometry. He needed to be at the center of the world. He needed the noise of the floor, the flicker of the terminals, and the cold certainty of the ticker. He needed to prove that 13 was just a prime number, not a prophecy. The lobby of the Thorn building was a cathedral of steel and ego. Julian marched toward the private elevator bank, the ivory dice clicking together in his fist-like teeth. "Morning, Mr. Thorn," the security guard said. Julian cast a glance in the direction of the voice, then looked away. Through the hole in his vision, the mark that had migrated from the die to his right eye, the guard didn't look like a man. He looked like a series of ticking clocks, many of them rusty, all of them spinning unnaturally fast. He stepped into the express elevator and pressed the button for the 42nd floor, the top floor, his floor. The door slid shut, the gold leaf interior reflecting a distorted, pale version of himself. The elevator began its smooth, silent descent. 10, 11, 12. The digital display flickered, went momentarily black. Then the number 13, which Julian had personally ordered removed from the building sequence years ago, flashed on the screen in a garish neon green. The elevator shuddered to a halt. Julian's briefcase slipped from his numb fingers, striking the floor with a heavy, deadened boom that seemed to vibrate through his teeth. His breath hitched, a cold, oily sweat breaking across his brow. He reached for the brass handrail, his knuckles white, his mind frantically running through the symptoms of a stroke or a sudden, stress-induced psychotic break. This was a deviation outside the standard deviation. His heart hammered a frantic, uneven rhythm against his ribs, a wild protest against the reality that had suddenly stopped making sense. The doors didn't slide open with their familiar hydraulic hiss. They peeled back like skin, a wet, tearing sound that vibrated in Julian's jaw. Julian felt a phantom weight, cold and irresistible, press against his spine, a shove from a hand that wasn't there. He was pitched forward, stumbling out into the impossible. Before him, a corridor stretched into a featureless gray oblivion, a horizon of nothingness where the rest of the city should have been. The floor was stone, topped by a rug the color of dried blood, and the air smelled of wet copper and burnt matches. It was a pier built over the end of the world. Heart hammering, he spun around to retreat into the safety of the elevator. But the elevator was gone. In its place was a solid wall of ivory. Dominating the heart of that bone-white expanse was a black door, and at its very center, a heavy, antique brass knocker in the shape of an unblinking eye. An unseen magnetism seized Julian's arm, dragging his hand toward the heavy brass with a strength that brooked no resistance. Julian reached for the knocker. The metal felt warm, pulsing like a living eyelid. But before he could release it to make a sound, the door swung inward on silent hinges. The room was his boardroom, but the proportions were wrong. The mahogany table was miles long, and seated around it were 13 figures. They wore the suits of executives, but where their faces should have been, there were only the jagged, flickering images of the lives he had liquidated. One figure's head was a repeating, low frame rate stutter of a car plunging from a cliff. Another's was the jagged, concave horror of a crushed skull. A grayscale loop of the moment a subpar factory support beam, one Julian had deemed too expensive to replace, had finally failed. To Julian's right, a creature in a sharp charcoal blazer possessed a face that was merely the static-filled image of a candlelit, but empty bedroom. They sat with their hands folded over the mahogany, their fingers translucent and smelling of wet earth. The man at the head of the table stood, the chairman of this silent, flickering board. His skin was the texture of ancient, yellowed parchment, and his eyes were empty holes. "We have been feeding on the cold ash of the lives you burn, Julian," the thing hissed, its voice the sound of 1,000 shredders. "We," the man gestured to the others seated at the table, "we are those lives." He leaned forward, the dry parchment of his skin creaking as he rested his skeletal digits on the mahogany. In a void where time is measured only in the screams of the broken, we waited for the gate to open. You summoned us with that impossible 13, and we have come to answer with our hunger. The figure with the crushed skull stood, his chair screeching against the smoldering floor. "We bartered our eternal rest for this hour, Julian. We gave up the silence of the grave for the sound of your breaking bones. We do not want your gold. We want the heat in your veins to pay for the winter you left in our hearts." A woman at the far end, her face a flickering loop of her own eviction, stood up. The Black Swan has landed, Julie, and its wings are made of fire and brimstone. We will peel away your lies until nothing remains but the raw, red truth of what you are." The chairman's hollow gaze widened. "Let us start with this skin you call a suit." He gestured, and the charcoal pinstripes began to smoke, turning into charred ribbons that clung to Julian's flesh like hooks of molten iron, flaying the skin back to reveal the pulsing raw muscle beneath. "No!" Julian wailed as he backed away, his heels clicking frantically on the smoldering stone beneath his feet. They moved toward him as a single entity, not walking, but expanding, filling the room with the stench of sulfur and revenge. He hit the ivory wall where the elevator had been, solid, monolithic, a dead end. Panic shrieked in his mind as he spun, his fingers scraping against the bone-white expanse, frantically searching for the black door he had entered through moments ago. But it seemed to have vanished into the oppressive geometry of the room. The woman with the face of shifting static was suddenly there, her movement a blur of shadow. She didn't smell like sulfur. She smelled of the expensive perfume he'd bought her a lifetime ago, mixed with the salt of tears and the rot of the grave. "Lover," she whispered, her voice a jagged caress. She cupped his flayed jaw with fingers like frozen needles, the gesture bearing the blue slits in her wrists, a stark, silent reminder of her final act. He tried to scream, but she leaned in, her mouth hovering inches from his. When she kissed him, it wasn't an act of love. It was an undoing. She locked her frigid lips to his, and he felt the very air being yanked from his lungs. His chest collapsed inward, his ribs creaking under the pressure as she drank his breath, his warmth, the very rhythm of his life. His vision swam with gray spots. He was a ragged, bleeding husk, his knees buckling on the burning stone. With a final, desperate convulsion of terror, Julian tore himself away, the skin of his lips sticking to hers before ripping free, strands of moisture stretching and snapping as a patch of his lip came away. Gasping, a thin, wheezing sound whistling through his throat, his flailing hand struck a hard, cold edge, the doorway, the corridor just beyond. A surge of frantic relief, sharp and misplaced, flooded through him as the back door materialized beneath his palms, a solid exit from the room's impossible weight. He lurched. He scrambled past the black door, his naked, scorched body steaming and raw against the cold wind of the void. Behind him, the silence was torn open by a cacophony of shrieks and wet, rhythmic thuds. "Thief!" the chairman howled, a sound like a grinding stone. "Usurer! Thief of 1,000 lives!" The ghouls didn't run. They surged, a black tide of flickering faces and grasping limbs, their footfalls beginning to lose their human softness, sharpening into the frantic, bone-deep clatter of hooves upon the stone. The hallway narrowed, the ivory walls pressing in like a constricting throat, slick with the sudden heat of their pursuit. Julian's heart hammered against his crushed ribs, a frantic, dying animal. He could feel the draft of their reaching hands, cold fingers brushing against his raw heels, the stench of sulfur and old grief thickening until he was choking on it. The oblivion ahead was no longer gray. It was a hungry, perfect black that seemed to pull the light from his very eyes. Julian reached the edge of the stone. He looked back. The things were inches away, their hands reaching out like grasping claws made of shadow and bone. He didn't think about the odds. He didn't check the forecast. For the first time in his life, Julian Thorne made a decision based on nothing but pure, unadulterated terror. He stepped into the nothingness. The morning air on Fifth Avenue was crisp, though in the predatory rush of Manhattan, few people noticed the scorched, broken man lying on the asphalt. They were too tied up in the clockwork of their own shit, their commutes, their coffee, the frantic alignment of their own lives, to look down at a man who had fallen from nowhere. The first officer on the scene, a rookie named Miller whose breakfast was already threatening to revisit him, knelt beside the remains. He had seen jumpers before, but never anything like this. The man was flayed raw, his flesh scorched as if he'd been pulled through an incinerator, yet the body was ice cold to the touch. Miller shielded his eyes and looked up at the monolithic face of the Thorn building. He counted every floor, searching for the shattered glass or the swinging casement that had birthed this nightmare. But the facade was a perfect, unbroken grid of steel and reflection. Not a single window was open. Not a single pane of glass was broken on any of its 42 floors. He looked back down, swallowing hard. Miller reached out a trembling hand to check for a pulse, a hollow gesture he knew was futile. As his fingers brushed the frigid, raw meat of the neck, the dead man's clenched fist, resting just inches from the concrete curb, suddenly spasmed and fell open. A pair of ivory dice spilled out, carrying the unnatural residual momentum of his impossible descent. They didn't just fall. They struck the pavement and rolled with a frantic, clattering energy, as if they had been cast by an invisible hand. Miller recoiled as they skittered across the pavement, bouncing off the curb with a rhythmic, final clatter as the first siren wailed in the distance. The dice finally settled. The first die came to rest. A 6. The second die tumbled, hit a crack in the pavement, and dropped flat. It was a 6, but with a black, impossible hole pulsing in its center. A 7th mark. Julian's final roll. A total of 13. Staring up from the gutter at the indifferent city. Mr. Belly's Infirmary, written by Sirius. Aw shucks, shouldn't have opened my big red mouth, the TV show host wailed into his oversized white gloves. Carter stared at the screen while standing on the other side of the room and holding an old coffee cup filled with mold. Somewhere between deciding he was going to finally clean off his bedside table and walking into the living room, the edible hit. He'd definitely taken more than he should have, but it was too late now. He was caught up in the size of the show host's gloves. They were each the size of Christmas hams. The host peeked over his fingertips, as bloated as Italian sausages, and stared right at Carter with beady, dark eyes surrounded by an open, stark white face. The style, he was pretty sure, was a callback to some kind of old 1930s cartoon. The whole show was in black and white, which made the reference to My Big Red Mouth kind of weird, because all Carter could see was a grin as black as an oil stain, spreading from ear to ear across the host's face. Say, hey, what have you got there? The cartoon show host pointed straight at the screen. Carter's heart dropped into his stomach. Nothing, Carter said, swallowing down a lump. His fuzzy head wasn't helping his perception of reality, and it sounded like the cartoon host was talking directly to him. Nothing, the host screeched, and Carter jumped. His knees gave out underneath him and he fell to the floor, catching himself with his hands. The mug banged against the hardwood and cracked, with the handle coming clean off. A laugh track played, but the canned, dead laughter wasn't enough to cover the host's own hysterical screeching. Once, when Carter was really high, he watched a documentary about hyenas hunting a lion cub. Just a dozen shining eyes in complete darkness, accompanied by that maniacal, ravenous cackling. That visual haunted him since, and right now it felt familiar. Come here, Carter. The cartoon host pitched his voice. Come here. Come closer. Carter crawled across the floor. For some reason, it didn't seem worth it to try and stand up again. He stared up at the TV, 8 inches from corner to corner of burning phosphors. He'd bought it specifically to watch programs in color. The host's face got bigger, with his body shrinking until it was just one large, grinning feature looming over Carter like a devious barn owl. Phosphors crackled, and static made a sound like a rubber band snapping as one white glove eclipsed the screen until those large, obscene fingers started poking through. Carter's heart skipped another beat, and he tried to back up, but the hand, once it was free, was too fast. It grabbed him by the hair and dragged him forward, gripping him so tightly that he heard hair follicles popping as they were yanked out, one by one. Suddenly he couldn't breathe. Static wreathed his face like 1,000 needles jabbing his temples and the underside of his chin. Carter tried to inhale, but there was pressure on his chest like a concrete slab sitting on his ribs. Only when the needling static moved down to his shoulders could he finally start gasping for air. He wasn't sure how long he stayed in that position. It felt like an eternity, or at least a few hours. Finally, the hand let him go, and Carter fell on his face. When he pulled his head up, he was staring at a giant pair of black and white shoes designed like bulbous spats. There he is. The cartoon host from before picked him up and dusted him off. That black, smeary grin parted only slightly, and through the slit, Carter could see a row of teeth like razor shards. "I'm sorry," Carter gasped out. His stomach churned and he felt like he was going to vomit. "Where am I?" "You're on the wonderful world of Mr. Belly. I'm your host, Mr. Belly." The show host spread his arms and legs out like a pinwheel. "Ta-da!" Carter finally stood. "Is that so?" He looked around. "I've never been on TV before." This had to be a bad trip, so he figured he should just roll with it and see what happened. He'd learn not to fight them, at a certain point. "Yes sirree, well it's your lucky day." Belly pulled a needle out of his pocket and pricked the side of his head. The whole thing exploded like a balloon, and not a full second later, a new one inflated from the neck hole. His grin was even wider, like it was going to split his head in half, with more teeth showing through. Anything is possible in the wonderful world of Mr. Belly. Anything. Carter's mouth went dry. He wanted so badly to take a step back, so he was no longer standing toe-to-toe with the cartoon host. But putting distance between them also felt strangely and immediately dangerous. "Anything." Belly's voice plummeted again, and he pitched the needle over his shoulder. He reached back into his pocket and pulled out a mallet as tall as Carter, with a head as thick as his torso. Belly handed it over, and it was like grabbing onto an anvil. Carter doubled over as the mallet dragged him to the ground, and Belly let out another hyena cackle. "Not how you do it. Let me fix it for you." The host slammed a gloved hand onto his back, and Carter's spine straightened out. The mallet was suddenly, amazingly light. He almost lost his grip and nearly launched it into the air as he came up. "What do you want me to do with this?" Carter asked, his voice trembling. "Hit me!" Belly bounced on his heels. He danced in a circle around Carter, every sudden motion blurry as his outline crackled through the air like static. "Hit me! Hit me! Come on! Come on! Put him up!" The cartoon host balled up his fist and made punching motions in the air. Carter grit his teeth and raised the mallet, bringing it down without much confidence. The first time it missed, and there was a loud slide whistle sound that came out of nowhere. The host slipped between Carter's legs and popped up behind him, blowing a raspberry. "Here! Here!" The host taunted him. Carter swung around and brought the mallet down. He didn't actually expect to hit the host, but he managed to bash him right on the head. Belly exploded in a bright red splat. the only blot of color against the inky stage. Oh my fuck. Carter hauled the mallet back. The end was crusted with red and what looked like strands of coarse black hair. The air smelled like pennies. Fuck. Oh my god, what was that? What the hell was that? He dropped the mallet and it landed on his toes. 3 of them cracked under the impact, and Carter crumpled again, clutching his foot. Ah! He ground his teeth and squeezed out a tear. Pain radiated up his foot, shooting all the way up to his knee, and again it was hard to breathe. The red, the blood, turned pitch black and the pool shrank. It became thinner than a ribbon, and it slithered across the ground, looping into what resembled that wide, oily smile before unlooping again and darting away. Wait! Carter started to stand and nearly fell back onto his face. He cried out, a feral blend of rage and pain, and managed to stay upright on his one good foot. He hopped after the streak, one hand stretched out as if he had any hope of catching it. I'm sorry about that. Please. His voice faltered. I think I need to go home now. Voices like a quartet harmony being played off a phonograph filled his ears while 4 lanky ghosts descended out of nowhere. At first he could see right through them. Then they became a little more solidified and sprouted lanky, wobbly black legs and arms. They wobbled and bobbled around him, waving white-gloved hands around and wailing from black oval mouths.
Oh, to Mr. Belly's wonderful world.
No, no, Carter snapped. Fear made his heart feel like it was going to come jumping out of his ribs. And in this world, he didn't trust it not to. Home, my living room, the real world where I'm from.
Oh, my baby's coming home to a white slab covered in raw, oozings. Goodbye.
One of the ghosts pulled out a muted trumpet. Another one started playing a flute. None of them were listening to him. Carter stumbled and tried to catch himself on one of them, but his hand went right through. Please. His own desperation wrenched his throat. Just tell me how to get out of here.
Mr. Belly has a place for you, on a white slab where the air smells like ozone. Goodbye. It's hot in here now.
Something grabbed Carter's hand and yanked him aside. He staggered, half hopping, and fell behind a 2-dimensional bush that was propped up like stage scenery. Oh my god. Carter's stomach flipped, and he couldn't hold back any longer. He vomited onto the ground, and it was all blacker than ink. Are you looking for Mr. Belly? A squeaky voice asked him. Carter turned his head, holding the back of his hand against his mouth. The thing sitting next to him looked sort of like a human, but its entire body was twisted out of balloons. No, Carter said deadpan. I am looking for a way to get home. No way home except for up, up, up. The balloon boy pointed at the ceiling. Carter looked up, but his eyes were just met with a blinding white light. He grimaced and dropped his head back down. I need to get home, Carter said. I'm on a bad trip. Where are you going? The balloon boy asked. Why is it bad? Never mind. Carter rubbed his face. Please, I'm hurt. Are you sure there's no way out? Did you find the color? The balloon boy squeaked. The color gets you out. What does that mean? Carter's patience and his sanity were degrading at an alarming speed. Color comes from everywhere. I have a favorite color too. It's blue. The balloon boy squeezed its middle, and the balloon shaped like a stomach burst. Blue slime went flying, splattering across Carson's face, and the balloon boy hovered there for a second, its top half completely separated from its bottom. Ah, nuts. It started rising toward the roof. Up, up, up. Wait! Carter tried to snatch it and drag it back down, but it was going too fast. It disappeared into the blinding light, and he winced again, shielding his eyes. He tried to see what was happening, but the balloon boy was lost. Only a second later, he heard several loud pops, and latex rained down around him. Carter dragged his hand over his face, and his palm came back blue. He stared at it for a long minute until the color turned black. "Color gets you out." The balloon boy's words echoed in his head. He turned them over and over in his skull, trying to figure out what they could mean. "I have a favorite color too. It's blue. Oh, shucks. Shouldn't have opened my big red mouth." What was his favorite color? Did he have a favorite color? Carter laughed. He was losing his mind. "Yellow!" Carter shouted like that was a revelation. "My favorite color is yellow. Hello?" He grabbed hold of the wooden bush prop and pulled himself up again. Where can I find something yellow in this place? The laugh track played again. This time, it was loud as a thunderstorm, booming around his ears. Yellow. Yellow. Carter limped, looking around for any hint of color. Yellow to get me home. Fuck! He dropped down to his knees and began to crawl, unable to keep up with hopping on one foot. Back to crawling. That's how this whole mess began. Carter's hands found what looked like a painted path on the studio floor and scrambled to get on top of it. As soon as his hands found the paint, he left yellow handprints. His heart raced at the realization and he crawled even faster, not stopping to try and catch his breath, leaving more yellow handprints and drag marks from where his knees scraped along the path. He only paused once to glance behind him, and the handprints were already starting to fade to black. Carter kept crawling, even as pain started to make his legs so stiff that he started losing confidence that he was going to be able to keep going.
Follow the yellow paint road.
A harmonious crescendo of phonograph voices, rolling drums, and crashing cymbals rose like the end credits of an old cartoon. The paint road dropped off, suddenly, but Carter didn't realize how steep the drop was until his hand hit empty air and he toppled over like a child's toy being launched off a kitchen table. He fell through the darkness, and then the needling static was back, stabbing him from all sides until he screamed in agony. It ended when he hit his head, and then all the color bounced back into his world. Carter put his hands over his face and sat up, his head reeling like he'd just dismounted from a roller coaster. He was back in his living room. The cracked mug on the floor rested right next to his foot, where 3 toes were ballooning and turning a heinous shade of purple that was almost black. Carter laughed, a maddening hyena-like sound. He pulled himself up and hopped on one foot, right over to the television set. He pushed the curved screen and static crackled against his hand as it fell backward, landing with an expensive-sounding crack. Mr. Belly's face was still frozen on the screen, white and white with a big dark grin. But there was no sound coming from the TV, only singing electricity. What did you think of these terrific short horror stories? Comment or email redtreehousepod@gmail.com. A special thanks to LG Wells and Sirius for submitting these stories. It's an honor to be entrusted with your work, and I hope I did them justice. And if you're listening, be sure to follow their work. You can find links to their social media pages, SUBSTACK accounts, and more in the show notes. As we close this episode of the Red Treehouse, be sure to join me next time as we continue exploring our strange and scary world. I'm your host, Will. Thanks for joining me in the Red Treehouse.